like Miss Scott's here, I'm going to show you how to use watercolour and then apply ink using a stick over the top. So I've already stretched my watercolour paper using water and gun tape. You do this by wetting the paper, taping it down with the gun tape and then letting it completely dry. That way your paper will be really nice and flat. This technique I'm using here is called wet on wet. So what I've done is I've wet the paper completely, just with water, and then I'm applying the watercolour on top. I need to make sure that my paper is completely wet and not drying out whilst doing this, so you have to be quite quick applying the watercolour before the watercolour paper goes dry. You can see here that I'm using complementary colours, so I've used blue and oranges. I've added a bit of yellow in there as well, and you'll see that I start adding a little bit of green as well. The paper has started to buckle, and you can see where the watercolour is kind of going down into the little wells. I quite like this effect though, it looks quite nice, so I don't mind my water buckling at this moment in time. I have got the paper very, very wet. This does dry completely flat again, ready for me to draw on afterwards. The watercolours were a little bit pale, so I've just added a bit more colour on top. Wanted it, fairly vibrant for watercolour. So you can see that now the watercolour is dry, that the watercolour is a bit paler. But it's completely dry now, and my paper is nice and flat, ready for me to draw on top of. You can see that I'm now using a stick. I'm just dipping it into the ink that I've got. This is calligraphy ink, but you can use any kind of ink. So when you dip the stick into the ink, you've loaded your stick up with ink, so it will come out a bit thicker. As you're using the stick on the paper, the lines become thinner because you have less ink on your stick. I quite like this because it gives you more time to kind of look at the image, because you don't have a lot of ink on your stick, whereas if you used a pencil, it's kind of an ongoing media, or even a pen, it's ongoing, whereas this gives you a chance to kind of stop and just look at what you're drawing. I decided to add a bit more shade and tone to these jellyfish. So I've just used a brush with a bit of water on it, and that makes the ink that's already on the paper bleed out. You don't have to do this, you could just use the stick and the ink. It just depends on what kind of effect you'd like to create, really. When you dip the stick into the ink, your stick is then loaded with the ink. So you will create a thicker line by using the stick straight away. As you're using the stick on the paper, the lines then become thinner because you have less ink on your stick. It's just kind of like using a paintbrush when you load your paintbrush up with with paint. And then the more you use it, the less paint will then be on your brush. So it's the same with the stick. So again, I've used the paintbrush with a little bit of ink this time and some water, just to give the jellyfish a bit more depth. Where I had used the water and the ink with the brush, it was all wet, so I let that dry so then I could then go over it again with the stick and the ink to add the detail. So that's what you can see I'm doing here, is just adding the detail back into the drawing. I really like how you can see the background through the jellyfish. Jellyfish are usually quite transparent, so it is giving that illusion of transparent jellyfish, so I really like this kind of idea. Again, you can see how I'm loading the stick up with ink. So I'm looking at where the thicker lines are first, and drawing those first, and then carrying on with the lines which then get thinner as I'm using the stick. So there is my drawing of jellyfish using the wet on wet method for watercolour, and then letting that dry and applying ink using a stick.